Hello everyone, it's a magnificent sunny day here in Westminster, and guess what I'm going to talk about? There's a magnificent sculpture by Henry Moore outside the Houses of Parliament. It's called Knife Edge, and that's where British politics in general and the Labour Party's future in particular sits quite precariously on a knife edge. And more policy pledges, not knowing whether they'll be delivered under the stewardship of Keir Starmer or the slightly left-leaning Andy Burnham, whose Northwest municipal-focused work has been pretty impressive. But if he were to be elected leader of the Labour Party, could he suffuse that regional focus and that keen municipal eye into the wider nation? Rewind back to the May local elections. A week or so later, the King was summoned to Parliament in full pomp and ceremony to lay out the government's plans. A government with a dissolved local council mandate and possibly about to change its leader, swapping Keir Starmer with Andy Burnham and giving us our 8th Prime Minister in 10 years possibly. We await Burnham's June 18 Makerfield by-election with bated breath. So here's Labour given the big red drum roll of policy in full pomp and ceremony, without a clear local council mandate, well really without a leader. The nation having voted heavily against Keir Starmer's centrist, all-embracing and yes very fair-minded but not very far-reaching policies and manifesto pledges. Many of them which he actually achieved. Migration was down, considerably so. Britain was amongst Europe's fastest growing economies. But it's not enough. It's not enough for people to feel real change in their lives. I'm on Parliament Square on this nice sunny day. I was also here on a day the Brexit Party celebrated Britain's exit from the European Union with a riotous party right here in Parliament Square. I say riotous, everyone was really well behaved. You can see the passion in their faces. A very definitive block of the more right-wing British electorate. You can see the true joy in their expression and demeanour. Well, the square looks a lot different today, with Britain long since divorced from the European Union. But are the reverberations still felt today? Does apprehension about our borders and the migrancy issue still permeate the voting behaviour of the nation? And the Labour Party don't know which way to swing. Well, on the left you have the Greens nipping at your tails, and on the right the charge of reform. But ultimately the question we'll be asking is Britain becoming ungovernable? I'm standing in a very significant spot in British political history. Did you know that the very first English Parliament of 1265 under Simon de Montfort met in Westminster Abbey? The Simon de Montfort Parliament of 1265 was a landmark event in English political history. It was the first parliament to include not only nobles and clergy, but also commoners, representing a step towards political representation. Yes, Westminster was at the heart of British politics even centuries ago. The choice of Westminster Abbey, a place of great religious and royal significance, underscored the Parliament's authority and solemnity. Did you know that Britain's earliest representative parliament met just behind me? In the Palace of Westminster in 1295, under the auspices of Edward I. It was known as the Model Parliament. It's considered a foundational moment in the development of the English parliamentary system. This assembly included nobles, clergy, knights and commoners, setting a precedent for the inclusive representation of different social groups in governance. It was under the reign of three kings in particular. The lineage of three kings in particular, a grandfather, a father and son, that's King John, Henry I and Edward I, that the foundations of British democracy and Parliament were laid out. culminating in 1295 with the Model Parliament under Edward I, which was the first truly representative English Parliament. And it met just behind me in the Palace of Westminster. Holding the Parliament at the Palace of Westminster, the centre of royal power and administration, emphasised the formalisation and centralisation of parliamentary authority. Most importantly, the location also helped establish Westminster as the enduring seat of English and later British government, linking the institution closely with the monarchy and the state's administrative heart. One of the earliest monarchs of this land, of Albion, of Britannia, the United Kingdom, to question rule from London, was Boudicca, Queen of the Iceni tribe in East Anglia. She laid waste to Roman settlements in Colchester, London and St Albans, and balked at the idea of Roman rule from Londinium. Arguably, Oliver Cromwell was even more oppressive than the Romans in imposing rule from London and the south on the Irish, Scots and Welsh, coronating himself in a coronation chair used for centuries by British monarchs in Westminster Hall, and giving himself the ominously fanciful title of Lord Protector of the Commonwealth of England, Scotland and Ireland. Of the 58 UK Prime Ministers, only 15 were born outside the south of England. Now that's something we have to examine if we're looking at Andy Burnham as a possible Labour leader, and thus UK Prime Minister. But on closer examination, this doesn't always translate to regional empathy in a British leader. Let's take a look at one of our greatest British Prime Ministers, David Lloyd George. Now he was born in Burnham's North West, in Manchester, and grew up in Wales, two of the regions prominent in their backlash against Labour in the recent local council elections. Here's a statue in Parliament Square celebrating David Lloyd George. Yes, perhaps one of the UK's most successful Prime Ministers, and indeed born in Manchester and raised in Wales, Andy Burnham's neck of the woods, where he's known to be King of the North.
So is that a good sign?
For Lloyd George, the regional divide was not really his focus. He wasn't thinking in terms of a north-south economic divide in a modern sense. The industrial north, including Manchester, was booming relative to rural Wales during much of his career. So the geography of deprivation that he knew was more rural to urban than north to south. The welfare architecture he built, however, pensions, insurance, progressive taxation, did disproportionately benefit poorer regions over time, even if that wasn't his intent. The Westminster focus of British politics is obviously an issue. Evidently, it's not the only issue. It's the one we've covered here, and if Andy Burnham is to pick up the reins, as a North West at heart voice for the whole country, and as someone who's often rallied outside of Westminster and voices reservations about Westminster, he may well mop up the lost Labour vote, and who knows, perhaps give us another great oratory voice, following in the glittering footsteps of the likes of David Lloyd George.